Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. This is the 7th lecture of the Prism lecture series with Pepita Seth tonight. As India is railed against for the dreadful things that now too often happen, it can help to recognize that the other side of the coin exists, and that I have been lucky to experience it. These are some of the words of Pepita. It's a coincidence that tonight, Lutika Rajan, who was supposed to chair this lecture, was a bit unwell, so she couldn't come. And therefore, Rizio is introducing, and she will moderate the discussion for tonight. And so it leads me to give those first words. And it is indeed a coincidence because I am, just like Pepita, a foreigner who has been here for some time. And as a foreigner and as an editor, a few months ago in March, early March, it was really rejoicing to see those words, the ones I just read, in a text that she sent us when we were doing an exchange, a dialogue on cultural tolerance, multiculturalism in India today. This came from against the backdrop of the recent cases at that time of censorship in press and in publishing. And so we organized this exchange with Pepita and with Edin Hu, who also happened to be the first speaker in this series in August. Maybe some of you were here. And so that text was marked me by the light and lively prose that Pepita used to express those words, to express this kind of overwhelming gratefulness that a foreigner at times feels in India. And I think this is especially something we have to recall today, just a few days after a pretty horrific event happened in the Delhi metro against 3 Africans last Sunday who were beaten up by a crowd. And since models often work better than principles, I hope we'll see in Pepita tonight an occasion for better cohabitation in India today. I'll just call Rizio to introduce Pepita.
Thank you, Sam. I'm really happy to introduce Pepita, which is a very, very dear friend. But as Sam said, Lutika Varadarajan was supposed to be chairing this lecture, and she suddenly fell ill and she was hospitalized last night. So we really hope she gets well soon. But Pepita and I, we had instant connection when we met. And since then, it has been a continuous kind of interaction, very, very deep kind of bond that we've shared, which led to this interaction which Sam was talking about, and also to this lecture. And I'm sure we will take this forward to various levels, from now also. Some of you might know Pepita's history and how she came to India. Her tryst with destiny in India actually makes a very, very beautiful story. In 1970, she came to India, with a kind of trace, following a certain trace which was left by her great-grandfather, who was a soldier in the British India, like he was serving in British India. And he had participated in the 1857 march from Calcutta to Lucknow. And so there was a diary which she had left, and there were events narrated in the diary. So she wanted to trace those events, find out more about it. So that's how she came to India in 1970. And since then, she returned to India many times. But then I asked her, how... every time she returned, she actually went to Kerala. This was in the north and in the east, and then suddenly she went to Kerala. So I asked her, how did this happen? How did you suddenly go to Kerala? So she said it was the elephant. So he said, what is this elephant? So she said, I never had a teddy bear. I had an elephant. So it seems when she was traveling in the north, in Bihar, so she was in this bus, and there was this one elephant which was on the road, and so she screamed, no, I want to see the elephant. And it's such a scream that the bus driver stopped the bus, allowed her to get down, and everybody got down. Yes. So she said, something which Sam said now about how India welcomes somebody who's coming in. So she said that was one moment and the elephant, the people with the elephant, they were asking her to ride on the elephant. So she said there's also this one snap of her on the elephant, etc. So there is this welcoming into this space, totally new person. And this experience of, she came to India in search of something, but then this was one moment when she realized that this particular space is a welcoming space. She was being welcomed. It started there, and every time she came, and then this search for the elephant led her to Kerala. And curiously, she says the first photograph that she took was of Guruvayur Keshavan, who's the legendary Guruvayur Keshavan. So, and then how the road takes you to different places, like her book, Heaven on Earth, which is on Guruvayur Temple. That elephant connection led her to really do this absolutely comprehensive book on this temple. But it is one curious thing is, like, temples, you don't allow, even non-Hindus in India. But she is, miraculously, she's got this official permission to enter all the temples in Kerala. One foreigner who's got really made headlines, so she can really enter any temple in Kerala. I would like to really connect as an introductory thing to introduce Pepita. She was a film editor before, while she was doing those initial things before. And then she's a photographer, a writer, a researcher. One thing that I've noticed about her work across these different fields is that there is a certain kind of stillness that she has, which allows her to capture a certain scene which is in front of her, the life of a certain scene. That is evident when you look at her work. Like you, the photographer, becomes still, so that the frame captures the maximum life and movement. So, and also there is another aspect of her presence. Like you look at her and you don't really feel that it's absolutely unobtrusive. She can merge into this space. Now she since the beginning, because the elephant took her to different ritualistic spaces, that she got this permission to enter a temple, merge with the people. It's this particular aspect, characteristic of her work, like, to remain still or near still, remain unobtrusive, and try to capture. There is the dissolution of the self, the tendency to dissolve the self and capture the movement which is there. Like actually we were discussing this a bit, like, how you capture that movement, dissolving yourself. So that is something which really has taken her and made her an acceptable figure in a very, very private space like the Theyyam's space in North Malabar. Very, very private, very intimate space. It's not really easy for even people in Kerala to go into that space and do the things that she's doing, interact with. This character, this feature of her work, which really allows her to do this. I'm sure tonight we are going to really have have an understanding of how she is moved by this space and how she moves this space. I also have, from knowing her work and from interacting with her, I also think that at this point in the history of our living traditions, it is also, we need such translocal figures to actually take this, transfer these living traditions to, across the world. So Pepita is that way a very, very seminal figure, and I really think this particular lecture, because we've been talking about this, is also an important moment in her work, which she's doing out there. I invite Pepita to.
Yes. I would like to start by saying that tonight's talk is part of a work in progress and therefore incomplete. In fact, had the subject not seemed so perfect for the theme of this series, I might have hesitated, since some of what is described has not yet been photographed. My involvement in the story that follows began more than 15 years ago, and since then I have been trying to get past the basics of what drew me to the saga of a goddess arriving in Kerala. I tested people, I discussed it, I tried this and I tried that, and I got nowhere. Yet although I even tried to give up, my interest never really waned, and as was probably inevitable, it came back with a bang, and I started seriously working on Theyyam. All this will, I hope, make sense as the story unfolds. I want to thank Rizio for asking me here and for calming down when I reached the I can't do this stage. I'm very distressed that the reason for Lotika's absence is her health, because for years she has been an enthusiastic and supportive friend, repeatedly urging me to pursue this story. I must also acknowledge that almost everything that follows is due to the generosity of Murali Panika, a Theyyam practitioner who, just a few short weeks ago, not only finally unraveled the tangled knots of this story, but crucially explained and re-explained many of the ritual nuances it contains. The irony is that though I have known Murali and his family for nearly 13 years, I never once thought of asking him. Things happen, as we know, when they are supposed to happen, and not a moment sooner. Several decades back, a well-known Indian scholar was talking to me about the nature of the Devi and how it changes across the subcontinent. In the course of our conversation, he said that since he knew about Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, he had assumed that Kerala would not be so very different. He then smiled and admitted that as far as Kerala was concerned, he was still adrift. In truth, Kerala is something of a law unto itself when it comes to rituals, society and belief systems. Yet although being in Kerala has made it possible for me to see that even the different regions within the state often have their own ideas, I too tended to feel that there was a more or less cohesive whole. It was only when I went north that I discovered the exception, Malabar. Malabar is a beautiful word, slipping off the tongue like a sighing whisper, leading one to wonder if it actually exists. Yet although Malabar is of course real, it is real in perhaps its own way, more a state of mind than part of the state of Kerala, which no doubt is why those living south of the Bharatapura River speak of going to Malabar side as if they would be forever lost. They have a point. Malabar is a land apart, where even now, with the internet in every nook and cranny and a mobile in every hand, life is still ruled by other forces. It is where omens count, where shades and spirits hold their own, undaunted, not needing to be troubled by non-believers. Where at dusk lamps appear in doorways, their golden glow repulsing whatever may darkly choose to emerge. Where drums pound ancient rhythm, where the howls of foxes rise in unison, and where the sudden fall of a coconut leaf can make you wonder who tore it down. Malabar is at ease with the presence of the other, still living cheek by jowl with such forces, both sides knowing how to adjust and make the allowances required for so doing. A land apart and yet for countless ceremonies, familiar with outsiders. The intrepid sailors, merchants and explorers who landed on its long coastline to seek its fabled riches, ivory, precious oils and jewels, sandalwood and the fragrant aromas of spices. Arabs, Africans, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, Portuguese, Dutch, French and the British have all in their time eyed such wealth, and by various methods, fair and foul, sought to load up their ships and sail off to trade their cargoes for handsome profits. It is therefore perhaps fitting that what now follows starts as a maritime story, an epic voyage that transported its divine heroine from one end of India to the other, and the lasting effect of her arrival and the relevance her presence still holds in today's vastly changed world. Of course, as always, there is more than one version. Some say that everything began several eons ago in Kashi, on the fateful night when Annapurneshri, the great goddess of that holy city, dreamt of Lord Shiva of Taliparamba, the presiding deity of one of Kerala's most famous temples. The dream so affected her that on waking she resolved to visit him, and without any delay sent for the great master craftsman, the divine artisan Vishwakarma, and ordered him to come at once and start building a large ship. Another more poignant story describes torrential rains and violent thunderstorms lashing the Malabar coast, uprooting trees, and then, when the waters subsided, leaving the rotting carcasses of men and dead animals to bring disease, food shortages and hardship. It was then that the bewildered population went to their ruler, the Kolatri Tamparam, to seek his help in alleviating their plight. Though visibly affected, he expressed his helplessness, his inability to assuage their hunger. In despair, he cried out, calling from his heart to Kashi Annapurneshri, household and took care of its day-to-day management, but also carrying large flower basket, the Mungata family, whose traditional occupation was making garlands in temples. Special mention is also made of 3 high-born ladies who stayed close to Amma, each one bearing a silver oil lamp, and each one destined to become the founding matriarch of a different family. In addition, there were also, if the figures are to be believed, 1,001 Konkani children and thousands of yogi children, the spiritual descendants of Shiva, who in the form of Bhairavan was cursed to wander and beg for bhiksha after committing the sin of cutting off Brahma's 5th head. And so at last the day of departure dawned, with the ship finally slipping its anchoring ropes and sailing off across several seas. All went well until they entered the most distant sea, the Sea of Red Lotuses, where the ship became trapped in a tangled mass of stems and roots, causing it to shudder and roll. The children were so scared that Amma had to calm them all down before praying to Kadalai Sri Krishnan, the presiding deity of an important Malabar temple. She did so by addressing him as her brother, seeking his blessings and requesting him to, just this once, save them, declaring that in return she would offer him a huge container of sweet bayasam. Then she called out to the crew, encouraging them and telling them to force their oars down deep so that the ship could pull away. Instantly it broke free of all the roots and stems and surged forward, sailing onwards without incident until it either landed or, as some say, went aground near a place called Aug-Dec. The local people, all belonging to the stoneworkers caste, had seen the great ship approaching and soon knew that a powerful and beautiful woman had arrived. Anxious to welcome her, they quickly made and decorated a temporary shelter of tender coconut leaves before rushing off to receive Amma and escort her back in a grand procession, giving her a place to sit and, though it seems unlikely given their circumstances, offering her gold, silks, precious cloths and a measure of beads and pearls. She explained to them that her desire had been to build a temple for herself, but that having seen that the surrounding land was a marshy swamp, she accepted that she should look elsewhere. She therefore decided to move slightly further inland to a place where she could stay until a suitable site could be found. And so, accompanied by all those who had sailed with her and with the local people playing drums and singing loudly, everyone set out in another grand procession, making their way to the village of Cherkunu, to a great ariel tree that stood on land originally occupied by a Brahmin house. While there are no details about the arrangements that were made to make Amma comfortable, it is stated that a special antechamber was prepared so that a guest could be suitably accommodated. It was then that Amma began forging links with those around her, sending out a special emissary to the 7 deities of 7 local temples to assure them that they would all be taken care of, that everyone would be fed and given good, clean clothes every year, and that all their daily expenses would be met. What is interesting here is that at this stage, Amma was not in a position to fulfill this promise, since she had no land to grow the crops she needed to feed people. However, she reassures everyone by stressing that he would do everything, using the Malabar word with which a respectful wife refers to her husband, thereby indicating both that she means Lord Shiva and that the goddess Annapurneshwari is an aspect of Parvati. The particular Shiva she refers to is the Lord of all lords, Rajarajeshwara, the Lord of Taliparamba, and the god who, in the same way that she is Amma mother, is Appan father. It is now that she summons Achitavarya, the manager of her household, and after giving him 2 parnams, a totally insignificant amount, orders him to go at once to Taliparamba, some 15 kilometers away, to buy not only rice and some cucumbers, but to meet Appan and get news about him. Appan is, as she had planned, intrigued, and asks Achitavarya where he and all the children have come from, and is told, "We are from Cherkunu." Next, Appan asks a somewhat startling question: "What colour is your Amma?" The answer is remarkable and likely to surprise you all. "Our Amma," Achitavarya says with considerable pride, "is as black as sesame seeds and as red as their oil. She has beautiful teeth, chiseled to perfection, wears sandal paste on her forehead, and has white spots on her black skin that look like a necklace or a garland." Finally, almost as an afterthought, he adds that she has a small face. Shiva is dazzled and thinks, if she is such a formidable and beautiful woman, I must go and see her at once. Then, though it is said that he never normally bothered with any finery, he immediately adorns himself with precious jewels and ornaments, puts on a special munda, and according to some, dyes his grey hair and paints his aging face. Finally, looking like a tree in full blossom, he makes his way to Amma's tree. Although on arrival he is respectfully greeted, shown to the antechamber, and seated on the small but beautifully carved bed Amma had brought on the ship, he finds that she is in seclusion, and so summons her to come out at once. How can I, she asks. I have no cloth to cover myself, no ornaments to wear. Then, having stressed her pitiable state, she observes that his crown is not only very beautiful, but would both suit and fit her. Gradually she works her way through everything he is wearing, commenting on all his ornaments, right down to a small finger ring, his munda, and even his sandals, stating their elegance and repeatedly stressing how well everything would suit and fit her. And so it is that one by one Shiva hands them all over to her, leaving himself looking, it is said, like a withered tree. In another version of this episode, Amma wastes no time on basic social niceties, but just reaches out and grabs everything Uppan is wearing. Either way, Uppan sees, too late, that he has been outsmarted and starts shouting at her, yelling at her to go back under the tree. But she is now secure. She has what she needs to feed her people and is no longer dependent on him. She therefore answers him back and without restraint shouts at him that until he gets back to Taliparamba, let him be drenched in torrents of rain. To which Uppan's retort is that when she reaches Cherakunu, let the rain be of blood and may she be drained of everything. This time Amma just laughs, saying, "Oh Appa, if you ever come to my Cherakunu, you will see that even the brush used for sweeping is made of gold." "Oh, Amma," comes the reply, "if you come to my Taliparamba, you will see that even the pot holding cow dung water is made of gold." But it is Amma who has the last laugh, declaring that all the surrounding fields, even those near Taliparamba, are now mine, and so fertile that bananas and coconuts and palm trees will grow there, and that the best land of all is in Cherakunu, and mine. Shiva has no option but to leave in high dudgeon. I should add that the first story I heard, the one that attracted me to Annapurneshwari, was somewhat different. It began soon after her arrival, when she was being driven by the need to acquire land for paddy cultivation. As before, she sends Achita Warrior to buy food, and as before, Shiva decides to go and meet her. The difference is that he then invites her back to his temple. She agrees, and in the late afternoon they set off together for Taliparamba, Amma walking respectfully behind him. Suddenly Uppan realizes he can no longer hear her anklets and turns round, only to find her standing still, lost in admiration at the surrounding paddy fields. She tells Uppan how beautiful they are, and, totally smitten, he hands them over to her. Yet though they then continue, she soon stops again, not once but twice, and both times the now besotted Uppan gives her the land. Finally, when they arrive at his temple, he invites her in. She declines with a smile, and after explaining that she now has the land she needs to feed her people, she turns round and makes her way back to Cherakunu. Despite this somewhat unseemly behaviour, the belief is that they are now both on good terms, even though Shiva is said to be extremely reluctant to wear any ornaments. As far as history is concerned, the land that came under Amma's protection was known as Kolatanad, and was the kingdom of the Kolatri, the senior Cherakul Tampara, whose descendants, now shorn of all their power and land, continue to live in the small village of Cherakul. They have a fine sense of irony, and while they express no regret or appear to harbour any resentment about their lost power, they are well aware of how the passage of time has so radically changed their lives. In fact, my favourite summing up of a historical event was made by one of them. "We," he said, "were the ones who welcomed Vasco da Gama. Later that was found to be a mistake." Be that as it may, they were once powerful rulers, which in turn meant that many of the region's great temples were theirs. Among them the Sri Krishna temple, Shiva's great Raja Rajeshwara temple in Taliparamba, and the temple that Annapurneshwari eventually acquired. As previously mentioned, there are differing explanations about what drew Amma to Malabar, whether it was just to meet Uppan or her heartfelt response to the Kolatri's anguish, which in the circumstances could seem more likely. Certainly the main song about her declares that she came to see the king of Kolatanad, which would mean the Kolatri. However, she never makes any attempt to even contact him. At the same time, Shiva, the lord of all lords, is conceived of as the region's supreme ruler. Whatever the truth, the Cherokee royal family have been and have remained Amma's ardent devotees, even though they can no longer afford to be her temple's most generous benefactors. The temple that came to be known as the Cherakuna Annapurneswari Temple was until very recently surrounded by the fertile paddy fields Amma had inveigled Shiva into giving her, fields which are now being taken over by the spreading village of Cherakuna. Some stories insist that the temple was built by her and that she then invited her brother, Lord Krishna, to be present, perhaps in memory of him having saved her ship in the Sea of Red Lotuses. However, the truth is that both his sanctum and his idols are much older than her shrine, and that he was being worshipped long before her arrival. Even so, the story is that Amma's temple was built with the help of carpenters, stoneworkers, and many others, including her Muslim sailors. Finally, she was carried inside the temple, accompanied by the 3 high-born ladies who had sailed with her, their silver oil lamps held high, both to light her way and demonstrate the great importance of our coming. According to tradition, her image of a mirror was installed by Parashuram. Unusually, the temple has a ruling that no image of Annapurneswari is available as a print for devotees to buy and take home. Yet while there are murals of her inside the temple, she can also be found at the center of the carved panel above the window through which, even from a distance, devotees can see the light of the oil lamps burning in her sanctum. And it is here that we find a link to the story of her arrival in Kerala. The figures either side of her being, from the left, Achitavarya, one of those who made her garlands, one of her Muslim sailors, and lastly a yogi. While Amma had correctly observed that Iron Tengle, where she disembarked, was a marshy and saline land and therefore unsuitable for construction, she was ultimately more concerned about people's hunger and their poverty-stricken lives, that there was simply not enough to eat. Cherakuna Annapurneswari's great blessing is that she gives food to everyone, both as material and spiritual nourishment, Anna meaning food or grains, and Purna meaning full, complete, or perfect, making her the sustainer of life and prosperity. So important to her is the embodiment of this role that at one time a bag of cooked rice was hung outside the temple at night, just in case a thief should break in and be hungry. She is often referred to as Agrashala Amma, the Amma of the feeding hall, and it is said that occasionally she has herself served food to great Hindu saints. At one time, a priest belonging to a particular family would become possessed by Amma, who then, through him, dictated how much rice was to be cooked. One day, the amount mentioned was so exorbitant that there was considerable hesitation about whether or not to follow divine instructions. Finally, after intense discussion, they went ahead. An hour or so later, a huge group of strangers arrived, a wedding party who, at the 11th hour, had fallen out with the bride's family and stormed off to the only place they could be assured of a meal, Amma's temple. Even now, twice a day, at noon and at night, people are called to eat, and all who do so consider the food, rice, 2 curries and buttermilk, as prasadam, the grace of the deity. Amma cares for the entire area around Cherakuna, and the belief is that the paddy fields still belonging to the temple need neither be tilled nor any paddy sown, since her rice will grow of its own accord. One morning, when I was watching the coming and going of the spiritual descendants of the yogi children who had sailed to Malabar with Amma, my eye was caught by the erect bearing of a lone man walking towards the temple. I soon discovered that at certain times of the year, he has to prepare a special bedchamber for Amma. This requires him to not only bring various materials to the temple, but to ritually approach it along the road leading down from Cherakuna's High Street. It takes him 45 minutes to reach his starting point, a fact that becomes more remarkable when you realize that he lives right outside the temple, and that were it not for this ruling, he could be out of his house and inside the temple in 2 minutes flat. Although it has already been mentioned that the captain and crew of Amma's ship were all Muslims, the belief is that when everyone disembarked, she asked the captain to remain in Malabar so that, if ever required, she could be taken back to Kashi. They were given land a mere 10 minutes walk away from the temple, and it is here that the descendants of those who sailed her ship now offer namaz and where their captain is said to be buried. Even now this mosque is closely linked to the temple, maintaining its right to give oil and rice on important days and receive the same from the temple for their festivals. These Muslims consider themselves to be of higher status than those around them by virtue of their ancestors having travelled with Amma, and therefore, out of respect for her, they do not eat beef. It is probably not surprising that at the time of Annapurneshwari's annual festival, various episodes of her arrival are ritually recalled. The festival begins on Vishu, the day marking Kerala's New Year, the day when whatever is first seen sets the tone for the coming year, when new clothes are worn and temples are visited, and when even the gods and goddesses have their sanctums open before dawn, so that their divine eyes can feast on the auspicious arrangements laid out before them. The joy of crowding into Annapurneshwari's temple at this time is hard to convey. Everyone drinks in both her beauty and the plenty she sees, even as laughing priests pour generous handfuls of paddy into waiting bags, literally bestowing Amma's bounty on her people. While the night crowds who throng her temple's vast outer compound mostly come to see the firework displays and enjoy the songs and dances the temple arranges at entertainment, those attending to Amma are busy making preparations for a long night. As soon as the night puja is over, a Jadamba, the processional image, is mounted on an elephant and, accompanied by lamp bearers and drummers, men carrying fire torches, and devotees calling out Govinda, Govinda, she leads the temple, setting out for the same tree for which she presided so many eons ago. On every night of her festival, this time is seen as an ending of tiredness, giving Amma a rest, the Didamba being placed on a stone beneath the tree while songs are sung and rituals performed. Finally, after rice has been showered over the Didamba, it is placed back on the elephant, and the procession moves off, once again accompanied by all those holding the hereditary right to be her attendants. Their destination is the first of the 7 temples that one by one she will visit on the 7 nights of her festival, the same 7 temples her emissary visited on her behalf in order to forge bonds between herself and all neighbouring deities. On arrival, and once the Jadamba has been placed on a pidam, a special stool, the temple's priest will make offerings and perform a puja. Finally, after shlokas have been sung and rice scattered, they start the journey back to Cherapuna. At many points along her way, people wait patiently, not only to make offerings, but to give bananas and cucumbers to the elephant. In return, they receive the blessings that shower down from the rice thrown up over the Didamba, grains which, after her departure, are meticulously picked up to be kept in puja rooms, as evidence of both her benevolence and her presence in people's homes, with 1 or 2 grains being kept to be cooked with their daily rice. If there are any unexpected delays in her night journeys, her devotees still wait, ready whatever the hour to show their respect and receive their blessings. Although some temples are relatively close by, on 2 different nights, Amma's round trips total 16 kilometers, bringing her back to Cherapuna at around 4 in the morning. Each night has a different significance and story. At one temple there is even a reminder of the tension that occasionally simmers between Shiva and Annapurneshwari. The problem being that although she has actually come to marry Shiva, she insists on staying on her elephant, and he refuses to leave the temple. Matters are finally resolved by him having the thali, the emblem of marriage, sent out to her. At another shrine, where the deity is a Bhagavati, she does dismount, and the concept is that the 2 goddesses then sit and talk to each other. When one of the lamp holders was asked what they were talking about, his reply was sharp and sarcastic. How am I supposed to know? Yet what everyone does know is that Amma's visits reaffirm not only her love and concern for her people, but the belief that her presence blesses them with grace and prosperity. Today, Malabar is famous as the home of Thayams, the ancient gods who come before their people carried in the bodies of empowered practitioners, men with intricately made-up faces and wearing elaborate costumes and headdresses. The Thayam shown here is a Bhairavan, the manifestation of Shiva who takes Bhiksha from Parvati as an Annapurneshri. While there is not as such a Thayam of the goddess of Annapurneshri, she is invariably an almost tangible presence in many of the shrines around her temple. However, at Iron Tengal, the place where Amma landed and where her daughter, now known as Iron Tengal Chamundi, remained, she is in a low-key way much more than a conceptual presence. The great importance of this place is that it is where Amma cooked her first meal in Malabar, providing thousands and thousands of rice grains when not even 1,000 grains were available. Her oven is spoken of with reverence, the explanation that it is buried after use leading to the assumption that something permanent and substantial exists. But no, it is nothing more than a pit. It is nothing more than a dug-out pit in which a fire is made in order to cook a special kind of rice. While the rituals and concepts behind this festival are excruciatingly complex, with some even hinting that human sacrifice was not unknown, one of the few irrefutable and basic facts is that only Amma has the right to have her oven opened. Here I must take a slight digression and remind you of the many plants and seeds that have been brought on board Annapurneshwari's ship. One of them is said to have been the humble tumba plant, and the belief is that when Amma first fed the suffering people of this land, she did so by preparing a form of rice made from its white flowers. And as we are now talking about Thayam, I should add that there is a further use for tumba in Malabar, since it is commonly used in many headdresses, particularly those worn by Mutapan, probably Thayam's most popular deity. In theory, and though many Thayams are honoured at Iron Tengal, the main deity is Chamundi, Amma's daughter, the goddess assigned the task of killing the violent Asura brothers Chanda and Munda. The presence of this proud and powerful Thayam is so striking that the red-clad figure beside her can almost be overlooked. Yet this is Annapurneshwari, in the rupam, the form known as a pattam, due to the similarly named gold ornament that she places across Chamundi's forehead. The great importance of her presence at Iron Tengal is not only that it is where she first set foot in Malabar, but that all those conducting the festival descend from the families of the stonemasons who welcomed and took care of her. As such, they take part in a ritual procession that echoes the time when their ancestors accompanied Amma. While variations of such processions are not uncommon, only the Iron Tengal procession has the right to go to Annapurneshwari's temple. And as it was eons ago, drums are beaten and songs are sung, as with great enthusiasm they set out carrying the Tidamba and the deity's sacred sword. The overriding concept is of Amma being Annapurneshwari of Cherakunu. I was asked by Muli to make very clear that we were talking about the Annapurneshwari of Cherakunu and not anybody else. The one who cares for her people by providing them with life-giving food. As such, she is not only supreme and above all others, but looks after them as her children. It is with this belief that the pattam is tied by the rupam of Annapurneshwari, and not only Iron Tengal, but at the ancestral home of a particular Brahmin family. There are also 3 other shrines where the pattam is tied by the practitioner assigned to carry the Thayam of a goddess called Uchita. Inevitably, Uchita's story is complex due to her possessing, like so many Thayams, different levels of identity, one of which is the divine form of Krishna's sister, the child who was substituted to save him from being killed by Kamsa, his murderous uncle. In any case, the overall belief is that though even when there is no visible rupam of Annapurneshwari, Her presence is assumed not only within sacred precincts, but throughout the surrounding locality. There is also the unifying factor that Chamundi, who of course is conceptually interchangeable with Annapurneshri, came to each of these shrines because of the particular family's devotion to her, and that as Amma's daughter, she has the right to wear the pattam. While the life of a Theyyam practitioner has always been hard, the 3 Malayalam months running from the middle of July to the middle of October are the hardest. The performing season is over, there is heavy rain and therefore no work. At one time they used to go from house to house removing evil or uneasy spirits and giving blessings. Although the offerings they received would help them during this lean season, it was also seen as a way of familiarizing a child with performing, taking the role of either Shiva or Parvati. When these various forms began dying out, the assumption was that the families no longer wished to continue the tradition, something that was far from true, since there had been no change in the availability of alternative sources of income. Ironically, it was because of education, since no school would sanction children being absent for 3 months. Only in Cherrakunam did it continue, although only for a day, and only after an astrologer had been called to investigate a series of bad omens inside the temple. His findings were unambiguous. Annapurneshri was angry that many of the ancient rituals and customs associated with that temple were either being stopped or curtailed. She demanded that they be restored immediately, thereby rescuing this particular ritual, known as Kodamori, from oblivion. Kodamori features a made-up and costumed child being placed inside the hobby horse, actually one with a cow's head, and dancing outside the Annapurneshri temple. As always, a shifting set of concepts eddy around this ritual, it being the time when the story of Amma's arrival at Kolatanad is sung, along with other songs featuring Krishna, Ganapati, and various local goddesses associated with Amma. It is also when earthly humour is provided by 2 masked figures deemed to be the servants of Kalan, a form of Shiva. The ritual has an added importance, since it is when Amma, ever mindful that this is a time of hardship, directly displays her generosity and compassion by giving rice to the participants and all their families. It is hardly surprising that Theyyam's practitioners are among Amma's greatest devotees, since they are the ones who, in the deepest sense of the word, know and sing about her. It is also true that when the time comes for a Theyyam deity to bless and speak to his or her devotees, they invariably remind them not only of Amma's greatness and her benevolence, but of her love and of the life-sustaining food she provides. The defining rite of passage for some young practitioners is to perform a deity called Thi Chamundi, an aspect of Vishnu who repeatedly jumps into fire. In recognition of his enhanced status, the concerned shrine will reward him with a special bangle, visually confirming his right to the title of Panika. For the families living under Amma's benevolent protection, the ceremony, which takes place just outside her temple, is presided over by the Cherrakul Tamparan, the former ruler of Kolatanad, and the one who actually presents the bangle. Once the ceremony is over, the new Panika is escorted back home by his extended family to celebrate. It is a journey which takes him past Amma's tree, and where, oblivious of the passing traffic, he reverentially bows before her. And it is back at home that a small token of Amma's presence can be found, just under the overhang of the roof, a dried leaf wrapped around a few paddy stalks, tangible evidence of how Amma cares for her people. The paddy is harvested from her land by the Pulyas, a community all too familiar with the harshness of caste discrimination, and yet entrusted to bring the paddy to the temple, drumming as they do so. A puja is performed, and once the small leaf bundles have been prepared, an announcement is made that all those entitled to them, the people of this land, could go and collect one and bring it home. By now it must be obvious that Malabar's ritual universe is intricately interwoven with a wide range of conceptual complexities. It is also a finely graded universe, one where devotion to both Annapurneswari and Chamundi is rewarded with not only protection and benevolent blessings, but the occasional granting of special privileges. A prime example of this is that out of the 5 shrines where Chamundi wears the pattam, all of them geographically close to the Annapurneswari temple, and all honouring the same Thayams, only those from the Ukamel shrine have the right to dance outside her temple. To date, there is no viable reason as to why this is so, since though the usual explanation is the closeness between the Ukamel family and the temple, they seem no closer than any of the other shrines. Be that as it may, the moment comes when Chamundi, accompanied by the Thayams of Ujita and Guligan, another aspect of Shiva as the killer of time, of death, make their way to Amma's temple in procession with the usually enthusiastic singing and drumming. Chamundi, who we must remember is Annapurneswari's daughter, appears in her full beauty, dancing before the entrance to Krishna's shrine and then before Amma's shrine, watched from within by the Brahmin priests. Finally, and with a last and powerful stamp of her foot, and as the huge crowd falls silent, she calls out 3 times, "Oh, my mother." Then, after being seated facing the temples, she addresses both the Brahmins and the Ukamel family, giving them each a banana leaf containing prasadam, before turning her attention to all those holding hereditary rights in the temple. At this point, her concern is to whether or not a special ladle used for cooking food is safe inside the temple. Only when she has been reassured that this is so does she turn her attention to her devotees and begin blessing them, distributing prasadam to the vast numbers by them crowding around her. When the 3 Thayams had left Ukamel, they had done so together as a group, although with Guligan holding Chamundi's hand, the apparent inference being that he is to keep silent. However, when the time comes for them to return to Ukamel, Ujita sets off by herself, visiting many houses on the way, going inside them and blessing everyone. Meanwhile, Chamundi, with Guligan beside her, walk back together, Chamundi blessing people as she goes, taking an ancient route that is strewn with memories of Amma's arrival in Malabar. It is in this way that Annapurneswari's blessings are spread out over the entire locality, reaching families from all walks of life, and it is back at the Ukamel shrine as the annual festival draws to a close that Chamundi, Amma's daughter, begins showering blessings on the land and its people, on those who recite the Vedas, on the priests and their children, on those with duties in the temple, on their animals and those who make garlands, on those who have carried Thayams, on the drummers, on the carpenters and the blacksmiths, and on those who clean and sharpen the sacred weapons, on the stone workers, and all those who prepare the Thayams and sing the songs. In other words, on all those who are Amma's children. It is a powerful moment, and one which leaves us with a deep certainty that a great ritual tradition is being upheld, is continuing, that a sense of the past lives on in the present, uniting castes and communities, and giving Amma's people an extraordinary sense of both her benevolence and their own identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Pepita, for that wonderful presentation. I'm reminded of a story which Pepita told me some time back about a place where these are all very, as I said, very intimate spaces, and she was in one of these those circles, and somebody came to her, looked at her, and said, Annapurneshwari. And when she narrated this incident to me, she very vividly narrates these stories. So at that time I really thought Annapurneshwari really looks like Pepita, someone who is fair and like this. But now when I didn't know about the Sachitavadiyar insistence that our Amma is as black as a sesame seed. I'm drawing your attention to this because the possibility of freedom, which is ranging from, it is from the same space where one insists that our Amma is as black as us or the sesame seed, that you are calling somebody Annapurneshwari, the possibility of, look at the way they themselves have liberated, they are liberated from their own insistence. And so this space is that kind of a space where, so you can actually see how the space has welcomed her. And if you look at these pictures, all these pictures are taken by her. So, if you look at that, these pictures lack that photographer's perspective because they present if you closely look at these pictures, Pepita's pictures, you see that they present the scene. You can't really make out where she's standing as a photographer. It's very difficult to identify where she is standing and taking these photographs. You actually forget the presence of the photographer. It's very difficult to identify where she's standing. So, and there absolutely the variety of these perspectives. So this possibility of entering this world of possibilities is also what she's been narrating Annapurneshwari stories, and somebody who's coming from Kashi, from the north, coming into this space which is absolutely different, language is different, everything is different. And there's this whole narrative. And she comes and establishes herself, enters the world of Theyyam, and becomes this black goddess. And then at some point, centuries later, somebody calls somebody like her Annapurneshwari. So this absolute possibility which is there. I would also like to just mention before we open this for discussion, how this lecture is relevant for this particular series, because we are really looking at the possibility of arriving at an organic model of governance. How do you, the first series looked at development and the fractures in development models that we have. And the series is actually looking at possibilities of continuities in various fields. We are specifically looking at these fields, these sites of continuity, because we want to arrive at some way of understanding how this is possible. Like Annapurneshwari comes here. There are a lot of give and take. She enters this landscape, touches the tangibles and intangibles, from beliefs to flora and fauna, you saw all this. The caste, creeds, everything is touched. So there's a lot of give and take, and then organic evolution of that culture, and seamless kind of governance. She is the presence, she is the omnipresent Annapurneshwari, but even as she's full, it is not, it's not too, there's no gap. So I open this wonderful talk for discussion. I'm sure there will be a lot of comments and questions.
No, there's something which derives all its power from a certain space and the belief of a whole people, and it's almost part of their lifestyle. Now, when you take this as a piece of exotica and you show it in festivals abroad, here, there, everywhere, what are you doing to the vitals of the belief and this whole form?
Well, obviously no good at all. I mean, but I must say, no good at all. No good. But these people are smart people. Mujirada Bhagavati was a deity, what I'm closest to, she was taken to New York, and I was there at the time, and I really was quite angry with Lakshmanan. I said, why have you brought her here like this? He said, look at her. He said, is that what you learn about it? He said, no, because they left crucial things off the costume. So, I mean, it is not, I mean, there's so many deep things here, but when they at least know what they're doing, what the quid pro quo is, maybe it's slightly different. I don't know. I mean, it also depends who and how they're taken. I mean, whether the people taking them are basically trying to rip everybody off, or whether it's being done with empathy.
Hi. I think it was a lovely talk, and at many levels I benefited immensely, as did others, I'm sure. My question is on governance. It's been a deep concern of mine how we as a polity after independence lost the connect of the power of such spaces and constructs to be able to benefit society at large. You gave the example of this goddess who is connected with an adequate supply and distribution of food. Similarly, you have variants of such themes across. Basically, an idea that has a grassroots presence. And my regret has been that we have not been able to exploit this idea in a mistaken belief that we are being secular, and we are not being secular enough, as that whole other debate suggests. So, in a little hope, I ask you, have you encountered any governance aspect which has benefited from the great command that these concepts have on the minds of the people who believe in them?
I don't know where to start. I have a problem that now you're catching me out. The level at which I am existing in Malabar is a level where there is no problem for those people, because it all works. I mean, it all works. It's like also in Guruvayur Temple, it all works. It's a well-oiled system, and it works. It's when it maybe comes up against the bad other, us, that there's a problem. But if you, I mean, everything is working in Cherkul, and I mean, of course there have been changes because the fields are not all hers anymore. But the system works. It's when people start mucking with the system. I'm explaining it very badly, and I'm not actually very good at these kind of questions because I don't think. Because I am plotting paper when I'm there. But I mean, I'm involved with blotting paper. I mean, I'm in everybody's lives, and everybody, of course, knows how to run my life for me. It's, but I never feel that there were these kind of problems going on.
You mentioned that the fields are now no longer
No, what do you call it? Well, there's some, they've got houses on some of them. I mean, near Cherkul High Street, they've gone, sort of thing. But near to the temple, they're still there.
Yeah, this is a food security, a local food security program in operation.
Yes, but I mean, she had originally, I mean, vast, well, up to Talipuram was hers. Leaving Shiva a bit short, but so the Land Reform Act, I suppose, is done. Yeah. But you know, the fact that she still has the power to get angry when a ritual stops being performed. So she is still exerting that power. And it's, the thing is with, there are so many levels of Hindu deity's behavior, but none of this is being done with any kind of fear. She's not making people fearful of anything,
The temple is managed by Devasam, or is it?
I think it, well, again, I have to do my homework, don't I? I'm not sure whether it comes now under the Malabar thing or whether it's a separate Devasam. I'm not sure. I think it does because the priests are on rotation. Some of them. The ones that have hereditary right in the temple are there. I mean, the family that is supposed to decide how much is cooked, and the families that do the cooking are hereditary too.
But, maybe may I ask, maybe it is also a transition time. It's never that, you completely, because of the Land Reform Act, you completely make a separation and say that you are entering another phase of life.
Yes.
It's not that.
No,
So there is always this transition, and so it's halfway entering,
Yes.
and halfway into this modern governance of our, and then halfway her governance. So, and the people are also in that in-between space. You are half believing her, fully believing her when you are in her presence, but outside of it you are. So this is half-baked, if one may call. Otherwise, it is also the transition, when you go to these living spaces, these kind of spaces, you never know when this transition is going to end. It's going to be a continuous process, any time. So this continuity is
Certainly that Vishu morning in Cherukuna, in that temple, is amazing. Everybody's squeaky clean with new clothes, all in traditional, and they are just throwing the rice at people, and it's the joy of that giving of the rice to everybody. Actually, they just holding the end of the upper cloth, whatever. It's just, they're just cascading rice into people's arms. The sense of that absolute joy of giving to her people, It's just wonderful.
I have a question.
Yes, sorry.
The children that are training in Teyam right now, has the tradition been opened up to children of all communities?
No, it's a totally hereditary tradition. There are about, I would say about 18, 19 performing communities. Each community is allowed to perform certain deities. Usually there's no crossover, although there are one or two deities that are performed by, like Pottam Devam is done by the Pulyas and by the Malayans. But otherwise, each community has deities that it can do. So it's a totally family, hereditary rights. You can't wake up one morning and decide to learn to be a Devam.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. My question is, going back to governance, and you said it was a well-oiled machine, which is fine at the local level, but you also pointed out that people are no longer learning the dance form because the school doesn't allow it, and they can't get away, and so on and so forth. So in a certain way, at the local level, that machine is showing cracks, is breaking down. And at another level, what is happening at the ground is not going up to governance, because the governance or the people who govern, I don't think, relate to what's happening on the ground. So is there a break in this, or do you think that this, as you said, this well-oiled machine, do you think it requires repair, or do you think it'll continue on its own?
How does it continue as it's, it's continuing on its own, it's under assault, but the it's always been under assault, these things. There's also, I think, that gets forgotten too, but things, it's shifting and changing, but this is not my area.
Don't worry about it.
They were always
All
on,
these words like governance actually scare the daylights out of me. I don't know what they mean, really.
they were always fringe.
Huh?
They were always on the fringe.
Yes.
Always.
But I mean, when the fact is, she fought back to get that ritual back to gentlemen, and there are other things which are now being revived that were going. People have got a lot of money, of course. That's one reason. I mean, shrines which had not been functioning as a Thayam shrine for 40 years, 100 years, whatever, people are reviving them. That is a problem because then they don't quite know the nature of the deity, so they have to get all kinds of astrologers in to find out who is the deity there and under what kind of character and bhava she was under, or he was under, no, it's a she. That they find that it's strange that, you know, you get the deities you need in the times that you need them, and some deities are now beginning to be needed now, but maybe weren't for a time. It's a very, I mean, the more I get involved at Thayam, actually, at one level, the level which I therefore dispose of, it is impossible to understand what's going on. At another level where you just let it flow all over you and get involved because you're completely doing and with what they're doing, is it all very simple? What's the problem? I mean, in Murli's family, it's a real Thayam household. I think 7 or 8 people live there, 9 when I'm there. But also other people are floating through. But nothing is a problem. I went just last Sunday, I'd gone for a pre-wedding ceremony in a Thayam family, and we ended up in a 4-bedroom house. I mean, a 4-bedroom house, that sounds really grand. A small roomed house. I mean, you could get nobody in that house, but at least 20 people slept there, with at least 10 children, so that's 30 people. But where was the problem? There was no problem. Everybody had a place to sleep. They cooked 5 kilos of rice, and I mean, a real proper meal that would, because there is no problem until you make it one. And I think some of these things, that is what's happening. It's because of the disconnect between urban and rural, I think, plays a huge role here, I think. That it's people need to feel that there is a problem with these people. But sometimes there isn't. Have I answered it?
Are the descendants of the Muslims there?
No. Yeah.
Nearby?
Yeah.
And Muslims live in such?
Yes. I mean, yeah. And Murli said to me, because you haven't heard the full story, you understand, that Amma is also involved with all these local goddesses. And Murli said to me, she's very involved with them, but nothing like she is involved with Muslims. And that, he said, will never change. He said the depth of the involvement in them is much greater because they are batting backwards and forwards with oil and rice and everything. And there have been complaints that, you know, that there's too much Hindu nonsense going on in that mosque. There's too much Muslim nonsense going on in that temple. I mean, it's fine, I say 10 minutes, but I mean, when I do admit, and I apologize for this, that the number of relevant slides was images was very low. So when I was there last week, I was running around trying to think of other things that I could sort of pad it out with, I suppose, to be honest. And I thought, oh, I'll go to the mosque. So I went past the mosque, and I was taking, actually the photograph I used, and a girl went by, and who was Hindu, and she said, no, if you come with me, I can take you around the other side, and you'll get a much better view. Because it's their mosque, you see. It's their, the mosque is of there, not of them and them. And the temple, Amar, is everybody's.
I think there lies the great,
Yes.
the great example for all these people's worries about governance.
Yes.
That is the answer to many problems of governance till the RSS.
Yes.
No, but this, I would also
Or
like
its
to,
other counterpart, the other counterpart.
you have.
When do they date this story to? Because the fact of Muslims being the sailors that get the goddess over from the north to Kerala would make it not so early.
No, well, you see, you know, the temple can be historically identified as being 1500 years old. So if she came 1500 years ago, there wasn't a Muslim to be found. So actually it doesn't add up. But you see, they've got what's called the get-out clause. Ah, that was the previous yuga. So, you know, it comes around. I mean, I went completely out of my mind when I discovered that they were using that for an excuse, well, not, excuse me, not an excuse, a reason why two things don't add up. It's because in this yuga, it happens like this, but the last time this yuga came round, it happened like that. Slight difference. So the Muslims last time would have come round then. I'm sorry, well, I know, but it's now the problem is like somebody said you can't teach chess to somebody because if you know it and you can't teach it to somebody who doesn't know it. So once I got this yoga business, I've been absolutely thrilled, there's no problem. So the fact that there were no Muslims until about, what is it, 1000, whatever, years ago, now I don't find that that's a problem.
Hi, excuse me?
India wins again.
Hi, I wanted to ask you something. I'm also curious about other communities. So you all partially answered my question about the Muslim community's role in the whole space. I'm also curious about the Puliyas themselves, the people you said, the caste who grows the paddy and actually gives the crop. How are they involved in the entire process? And also, where does the Teya community practitioners themselves stand in the caste system?
They stand at the bottom end of it. All of them. I mean, all of them, I hate all these words, were formerly the polluting castes. But I mean, I stayed with at the beginning when I went to Malabar, I stayed with the Charitable Thammaran, and what's the relevance of what I was doing? Is asking a question?
Caste dynamics of the whole entire process. So the Puliyas are the ones who grow the paddy, and I'm sure they're the ones who get it there, but I don't know where they stand. You mentioned how every...
Yes, oh, that's right, yeah. The story I was going to tell is that one day the Thayams were coming, quite a lot of the Thayams will go around the locality after the main activity in their shrine. And this Thayam came to the Charitable Thammaran's house. He said it was very embarrassing because I had forgotten they were coming. I hadn't got any money. So he said, I hid. And the Thayam yelled at him to come out, saying, I know you're in there. But he said, how could I go out? I'm the Charitable Thammaran. I mean, it's not a title anymore, but the point is that the family by and large are very respected. So there's nothing they respect the fact of who he is and was who he is. But he was worried that he was not being able to give what he should give to the Thayum because he simply hadn't got any. So I asked him afterwards, you know, would there be any sort of comeback in the old days with the Thayum yelling at you? And he was absolutely horrified by the question. Because they were absolutely horrified. Now how can you say that? Because it's not the low-caste man yelling at the ruler to come out. It's the god yelling at the ruler to come out. And that is very clear, very, very clear in all these things. Who they are and who they are not.
But did he come out?
No.
No.
And no money.
Congratulations once again. Fascinating talk and some outstanding work that you're doing. I was just trying to place what you have told us today in the larger context of what you're trying to do. Is this going to be one chapter or one amongst many stories that you're hoping to record?
Because actually, I mean, I'm now, I think, almost in my 8th year with Thayum, and I better hurry up. Otherwise, I have to come incarnate to finish it. You know? But so it's got to be somehow, you know, the small for the huge. And I feel that the story of Anapanesha, was the shift will be different in the book, is a way of showing an entire area and how all these different threads are woven together to make the cohesive whole for that locality. And because it is the major, the Voluntaries are the major royal family in Malabar, you get so many elements that come together in that locality, which actually at some level are there elsewhere, but not quite so richly defined.
So will it be the main thread that holds?
Yes, so if I feel, because it is, no Thayum is who you think they are. Even when you find the other identity, it's not necessarily the right identity. They change from shrine to shrine, even the same Thayum, and it's a nightmare. But so you have to try and find a way of making it digestible, actually, without in any way betraying the power of it all. And I think her circumstances and her, she binds a large and important area of Malabar together. That there is no doubt. And if that will stand as a kind of template for how Thayum and everything else that goes on in Malabar interacts and interconnects and what the problems are.
Are you also doing videography also recently?
No, it's enough that I'm, thank you, please.
So much to record, so much to document.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry for asking that question. It's more by observation. It was said in the beginning that you've been given special permission to enter all the temples. Now, I think that is one of the most extraordinary things that I've seen in my life, because I am reminded of this Italian dancer, Iliana Cittaristi, who's been she settled down in Orissa. She's been there for the last almost 30 years. And she speaks only Oriya. She lives in a small house which is very, very Orissan, right beside the Bindusagar lake. She wears only a sari, a bindi, and she's totally Oriya in every single way. And she's written one of the most readable books on Limsa and Mahapatra, gathering together a lot of scattered information which people have not been able to put together earlier. But she's not allowed inside the temple. And I think this is extraordinary that you've been able to achieve this. I mean, how did this happen? I'm a little curious.
Everyone asks this question.
Brings in high place.
The highest.
Highest, yes.
I think Orissa is very different.
No, but even I've seen in Kerala, they don't allow, they are very strict.
That's true.
I've seen all the non-Hindus being allowed, not being allowed to enter the temples. I've
convert to formally to Hinduism or anything? Did you undergo any ritual? No.
No. The only, although...
Arya Samaj or something?
Yeah, I know, but that was after I'd been going in and out of Guruvaya for 20 years. And what happened was when I started doing the book, and I started doing the book, how would I have the idea of doing a book on Guruvaya? If I had it, I would have abandoned it instantly as not practical. But two people in the temple said, why is it that you never take photographs in here, you take them in every other temple? So I said, well, I didn't actually think it was an option. They said, you're right, it's not. But it would be for you. So I said, I'll think about it. And one of them got wild with me. He said, who are you to think about it when the Lord has just said you can do the book? And then when I started the book, that was a very uneasy time with these kind of matters. One of them said to me, I think you better go to Kurigod and get the Arya Samaj ticket thing, because he said it means nothing to us and it means nothing to you. But at least if somebody makes a fuss, you're covered and we're covered. But he said that I want to make it very clear that you have the right of entry here and we don't have a problem with it.
I just wanted to ask you something about a similar ritual that happens in South Canada, in Tulunadu. They have something called the Bhuta Kola, which is very similar to this. Are you aware about?
Yes.
The question was really, the Bhuta Kola that's performed in South Canada is supposed to be pre-Hinduism. So
yes,
they worship spirits.
Yes. Well, so is a lot of things.
Yeah, actually, the story that you told us is actually connected to Hinduism. So I wanted to know whether one could actually date these in any way. Would Thayam be sort of post?
Well, I think you can see in a way because of the costumes. Guluban is obviously very ancient because actually the mask, the Okamel mask, is a very rare one. It's carved and everything. Whereas normally it would be just painted. Or nowadays, of course, they do it in hardboard, but tender coconut leaves and things like that. So yeah, some of them are dateable, and some of them are actually. Well, this is the grey area here. Many of them are actually deified humans, and of course, Tacheli Udanan can be dated. Absolutely, he's a historical character and was killed by a rifle shot. So, and there's nothing to stop a Thayam being brought into being or whatever now.
I was just wondering whether that tradition is older than the Thayam tradition.
I would think, they say that it's at least 2,000 years old, Thayam, but at least. And it's because of the, whatever you like to call it, sanskritization and everything, it's pulling in the big guns of the main Hindu deities. And there is no Thayam, other than Bhairavan, I admit, there's not really a direct Thayam of Parvati or Annapurneshwari or Shiva, Vishnu. There's one Thayam, but there are other. There are 47 different deities that comes under the heading of the Valyatamparati, the great goddess. And then somebody will say, she is Parvati only. So they know it, but because it has to, these deities have to satisfy, if you like, if that's the correct word, the needs of that shrine and those people, which is why there are differences. So she will have a slightly different take there. So they will give, the name will be local, but actually, you see, when the Thayam people call deity to themselves, to come into, for them to carry them, they don't call them by, let us say it's Iron Temple Chamundi. They don't call Iron Temple Chamundi to come to them. It's Shakti. They're calling something else. The names are just for the locals. And to confuse people.
Are there no longer any signs of pollution or glorification in the rituals that you see? Are they there? Have they changed over time?
I mean, there is purification before they start the rituals and things, but
I meant in terms of caste and pollution.
not in the shrines, no. But it's, I mean, it's a highly stratified world. Highly. But, no, there are nuances of things. You can say that it's that because they're keeping to the old, I mean, the Thayams that you saw dancing outside the temple cannot enter the Annapurneshwari temple. And up to, I don't know when, 1948 or whatever, the Thayam artists couldn't. And the irony is now they can go in and out of the temple, but the gods can't. The Malayali is a clever creature. I mean, I saw it very clearly once near Rizio. There was a shrine where the Bhagavatis was said to hate the smell of elephants. So they used huge effigies of horses. This is near Paramangalam. And all the Naya horses were parked inside the temple. But all the lower caste ones were parked outside. But all the lower caste people were going into the temple to worship. They said, well, yes, that's true. We can worship there now. There's absolutely no problem. But one of them said, you see, if we brought our horses in as well, there wouldn't be enough room for them all. So they rationalized it quite happily that those horses stay out and the other ones come in. Any more questions? Yes, exactly so.
Any institutional support before coming for these Thayam performers? From any institutional financial support or something?
No, thank God.
From Folklore Academy?
No, I hope not. No, they have other agendas, let me tell you. Oh, no. Yes, temple trusts and all that spring up overnight. Yes. No.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah, no? Okay. I would like to make a couple of remarks before we close. There is this very prominent Thayam artist called Lakshmanan Peruvanna, with whom Pepita associates very closely, and also she actually lives with him many a time when she is there. But Lakshmanan once told me something about this last question, the last issue that we are discussing about the financial. So she said, there are many people who come and, actually, in fact, that is the question with which we started also about archiving and videographing, recording, and making it a kind of tourist piece, etc., etc. So he was negotiating this issue. Very deep mind, very deep mind. He is class 6 dropout, but you talk with him, he's a philosopher, he's a medical practitioner, he's an artist. Everything that you see on the body, I mean this Thayam is made, physically, literally made by the artist himself. So it is absolutely, and everything is made, there are more than 900 deities coming out there in that small space. These two districts in Kerala, northern districts, Kannur and Kasaragod, this small space, there are more than 900 deities coming out in a span of 3 months or so during that winter months. So, this question of coexistence, which we discussed, how is it possible for 900 gods to really come out and, be here in this space? This is one lesson that our governments would have to really take. It is indeed a translocal thing. And there is this omnipresence of Annapurneshwari there in that space. there is no quarrel. They all come out, and it's an elaborate process of ritualistic performance, days, months, lasting days and months. So how is it possible for them to really do this even today? It's amazing. And that is one thing. So then Lakshman told me about this very amazing thing, the understanding that this man has. He said there are the people who came to support, saying that we can archive this. He said, I walked out of many of the meetings. I said, why? He said, what is the point? The tradition is dying because the younger generation, they are not really, he said 15 years is what I see if it goes. The way Theyyam, the real Theyyam will stay only for 15 years, if this is the way. I said, what is the way out? He said, something has to be transferred. Not the paraphernalia, not the 950 odd, huge, that externals. It's not that. There is some seed that we have to transfer. And that is the seed of governance. That is the seed of this ideal which makes the Theyyam possible. So that is something which we have to transfer through this next 15 years or so. He said, unless an archivist comes with the possibility of doing this thing. Otherwise, somebody will get a grant of whatever money, just photograph, put it in some archive, somewhere in a museum, which is of no use to the Theyyam artist or the Theyyam space. If the tradition itself is dying, why would you have this archive at all?
No, and what is worse is that it will unleash a generation of pretenders.
Yes. So what I am trying to say is the Theyyam space knows this. It is not that they are a set of fools. They really know this. They know this and they resist. And they resist till the time the right sign, they get the right sign.
They chose me.
Yes. No, it is also indicates, it tells you why they welcome somebody like Pepita and not many of this. He has the daring to walk out of some of these important meetings. But he will welcome somebody like her. So they know what can go. So I'm extremely happy about this evening, Pepita.
Just one,
Yes.
I think it might, I recently discovered through somebody in Guruvayu and that there were priests in Padmanabha Swami temple in Trivandrum who had migrated from Ranagad, Payanur, the region of North Malabar, to the temple, he said a few hundred years ago, and it transpired, I went to see them, I went to see these priests, and it's incredible, they still have a Kannur accent. They migrated, they said at the time of the Shankaracharya, which is 11 centuries ago, and they go back, they're Nambudris from North Malabar. Now, it's something like 550 kilometers away. I mean, how do you go there that long ago and reach the Padmanabha Swami temple and have the Theyyams mean so much to you that you go back annually for the Theyyam festival in your ancestral house? I mean, it is unbelievable. Now there are ways of going backwards and forwards that are easy. But then you have to walk most of the way, or sometimes you can of course take a boat. But and the joke is every other researcher, and I'm not a researcher on Theyyam, every other research type person will proudly and happily tell you how much the Nambudris distance themselves from Theyyam. They are in it up to their necks and beyond. And obviously, if they are going to migrate all that way, it has to mean something to them if they go all the way back once a year, and they continue on. And so they've invited me to go there this time with them. You know, and 2 years back, there was a Malirat in Taliparamba, conducted by the country of the temple. I mean, even when people don't think I mean, when at this Malirat, all the deities except one is performed by the Malayan community. There is one deity which is the presiding deity of the Tangkis family. She's known as Oil Bhagavati, is performed by a Brahmin. They conduct, normally the Nambudris conduct daily pujas for her, and she's very sacred and special for them. When the Theyyam artist who is going to perform her Theyyam arrives, the essence of that deity, the Chaitanya, is transferred to him. So for the 2 to 3 days of the festival, he walks around with the deity, as it were, within him. And the Nambudris stop doing the puja because she's inside this man, not in her thing. And somebody says yes, and she has good time because she's able to roam around and have good time. But it's, I don't know whether I really question whether I'm making sense, but all these nuances are all sort of like a cogwheel, really. They all come. Yeah.
Yes, Irene. Okay, thank you very much for being here.